The Moonlight Boy. Chapter 1. The Shift. Andrew Donovan was meant for an ordinary existence. But life doesn't always play fair, does it? You see, things were somewhat simple in Goodhots, the town shielded by hills where Andrew happened to be born by luck, or perhaps some would argue, by misfortune. Every house boasted honey-colored fronts, adorned with pitched roofs, arched doorways, and protruding chimneys which led to cozy inglenook fireplaces. Climbing roses and honeysuckle bushes embellished each front garden. Almost every father earned his living at the sawmill. And without a shred of doubt, all mothers undertook the noblest and the most challenging of missions, tending to their homes and nurturing their children. As for the children, they were granted the freedom to roam and play wherever they pleased, as long as they were home in time for supper. Except for one particular day in the summer, every 7 summers. Peter and Eileen, Andrew's parents, were not exactly young when he came into this world. The baby bore a striking resemblance to his mother. The same sun-kissed soft hair, the same clear blue eyes, the same rosy cheeks. And much like his mother, his smile illuminated every corner of a room. However, unlike his mother, he had a birthmark on his left shoulder blade, in the shape of a pear. The child's been marked, one of the nurses at the hospital had said. But the new mother was too happy and too tired, or maybe too scared, to ask whether that was a good sign. The Donovans dreamed of great things for their baby. Peter, with his sturdy frame, dark locks, and a mustache to match, wanted Andrew to work at Pride and Haughty Sawmill, just like him. It was, after all, the only factory in town. But Eileen had different dreams. She hoped he'd become a teacher or maybe even a pharmacist like their neighbor down the street. While Peter worked at the factory, Eileen took on the job of the town's laundress. Her backyard, with bright white sheets, bedspreads, and shirts fluttering on the clotheslines in the gentle breeze, looked like a ship with pristine sails floating on a calm sea. Meanwhile, Andrew proved to be the sweetest baby in the whole world. He didn't keep his parents awake, not for a single night. At the slightest whimper, his mother would come to his room, nurturing him with love before gently settling him back into his wicker cradle. And the Donovans marveled at their good life. That is, until Andrew reached the tender age of 5 weeks. One summer day, which looked like any other, Eileen decided to bake a cranberry pie for dinner. The morning seemed perfect. Peter left for work whistling, and the baby snoozed away in his cradle with a sweet smile on his face. A nice song played on the radio as a light gust carried the scent of freshly washed laundry and jasmine blooms through the kitchen window. Oddly enough, Eileen discovered she didn't have any sugar left, although she was certain she had bought a new sugar pack just the other day. Now there wasn't a single grain left in the sugar bowl. So she went to borrow some from her neighbor. She had only been missing for 5 minutes. She remembered checking the tall case clock in the sitting room before she left. When she came back, something was different. She could feel it in the air. An eerie stillness had settled over the house and the entire street. It was all quiet. Too quiet for that time of the day. No birds were chirping, no children shouting, and no dogs barking in the neighborhood. No wind blowing, and no leaves moving in the trees. Even the sheets on the ropes looked frozen still. And she had the strange feeling that she was being watched. Eileen rushed to the baby's room, nearly stumbling on the stairs. As she stepped closer to his cradle, she paused, gazing at her child as though seeing him anew. He was awake, his foggy grey eyes fixed upon her. The cradle appeared disheveled, and the baby's clothes were askew, as if hastily donned. She reached out to him, but the baby bit her hand the moment she touched him. Her heart leaped in her chest as she picked him up from his cradle. That very moment, Andrew burst into tears. And the birds chirped again, and the children went back to their games. The wind whistled through the branches once more. and the dogs growled and howled as if heralding the end of the world. But the baby wouldn't stop crying. And he cried, and then cried some more. In vain his mother tried to feed him. To no use she sang to him, rocked him, or walked him across the room. He was crying when his father came home from work. He was still crying late into the night, as darkness settled in, a quiet witness of the Donovans trying to soothe their child. "There's something wrong with our baby," Eileen said, her voice just a shade louder than a whisper. Peter observed her with a hint of irritation as she paced back and forth across the room, cradling the crying baby in her arms. "It's probably nothing. Babies can be fussy sometimes. Tomorrow morning, everything will be back to normal, you'll see," he reassured her with a yawn before heading to bed. That night, Eileen watched Andrew squirming in his cradle like a restless cub. Eventually, tired of too much crying, he drifted into an uneasy sleep. But come morning, the crying was back. Despite Eileen's singing the sweetest lullabies and rocking him tirelessly, the baby remained inconsolable, tossing and turning in his cradle. In the weeks that followed, the strange changes continued. The Donovans watched their chubby pink baby turn into the most curious creature. His head grew larger. His ears became pointed and topped with a tuft of white fluff. His eyes widened and took on a slanted appearance. His once blonde soft hair grew unusually long for a small baby, turning to white. His skin paled to a sheet-like hue, and the birthmark on his shoulder blade disappeared completely. However, the child's changing appearance wasn't Eileen's biggest concern. She began to notice peculiar occurrences surrounding him, particularly as night fell. Objects would materialize and vanish into thin air. Crackling sounds and sparks seemed to emanate from every corner. And if she placed cookies and milk on the table near the cradle, they would disappear the moment she turned her back. Over time, weary of the chaos in his house, Peter developed the habit of coming home increasingly late. At the end of a long day, the tavern seemed more welcoming than his own house. The tumult of voices, more pleasant than the one of his own son. Upon returning home late at night, Peter gobbled up something and then went straight to bed. He would only come out the next morning to leave for work again. All this time, his tireless wife took care of the entire house and a restless child without a word of complaint. Before long, the news of the Donovan child spread throughout the entire town. After a drink or two at the tavern, Peter divulged to anyone who would listen to the woes of his ailing son. To him, such peculiar behavior and appearance could only signal a grave illness. One day, following a neighbor's advice, Eileen secretly called the only doctor in town to see the child. Dr. Goodfellow examined him with both fear and curiosity. But he couldn't find any sign of illness. At least, none that he knew about. Tired of the little creature's biting and spitting, he eventually spoke to Mrs. Donovan with the assurance befitting a doctor of his reputation. Oh yes. A textbook case of intellectual disability compounded by severe muscular dystrophy. And, of course, albinism. What does that mean? Eileen mumbled, feeling her heart sinking. It means your child will never talk or walk. And he'll be as pale as a sheet of paper his whole miserable life. But don't worry, he added, now there are places in the big city to offer help for the care of such special children, like your son. But Eileen couldn't bear the thought of entrusting her child to the care of strangers. The mere thought of it made her heart ache. So she paid the doctor with the little spare money she had, and did what any loving mother would. She decided to keep Andrew away from everyone's sight. Yet the strange occurrences in the Donovans' home continued. For Eileen, that called for some changes. First, she relocated the baby's cradle to the sitting room, ensuring she could keep a watchful eye on him at all times, even while tending to her chores. She went a step further by choosing to sleep in the same room as Andrew. These changes appeared to please her husband, who claimed the bedroom as his domain, with Eileen venturing in only once a week for cleaning. As for little Andrew, nothing seemed to comfort him. The crying, however, was not so intense on sunny days or during the nights with a full moon. Eileen moved the cradle near the window leading to the front garden, and the baby giggled and laughed, trying to catch the light with his bony hands. Those were the only moments of the day when the house was quiet. His mother could finally doze in her rocking chair, enjoying a well-deserved rest. Soon, the quiet moments became more frequent, and the Donovans' home went back to some normalcy. By the time he was 3, little Andrew had never left his crib. He couldn't sit or stand. Instead, he was eating just about everything. His mother found him one day chewing on one side of his wicker cradle. "Soon he's going to eat us alive," Peter used to mutter, watching his son's appetite. But Eileen would have gladly given up all her meals just to know her boy was happy. Until the age of 5, Andrew Donovan had not uttered a single word. Despite this, his mother noticed some improvement. One spring day, he stood up while attempting to catch a bug that had flown into the room through the open window. A few days later, he even reached for the flowers on the shelf above his cradle. However, his appetite took a downturn once more. He refused to eat anything except vegetables. The sight of meat made him feel so nauseous that he nearly fainted. Instead, he developed a fondness for puddings, pies, and all sorts of berries. As time passed, Andrew began to explore every corner of the sitting room. His mother often found him in the most unusual and unreachable places, perched atop the wardrobe, hanging onto the paintings, or nestled above the fireplace. Despite his adventurous spirit, the little boy rarely cried and seemed content with even the smallest nook in the room. Yet his appearance remained the same. His fair hair cascaded down his shoulders in silky locks, sometimes shimmering softly in the moonlight that streamed through the window. "Aren't you a curious child?" his mother used to say, caressing his face. She neither tried nor wished to understand the shift in her babe. She had an unusual child, and that was that. But as Andrew grew, strange things continued to happen around him. Whenever he touched something made of iron, he'd get painful wounds and burns on his skin. His mother would use a special lotion to help him heal. Despite the pain, Andrew kept hurting himself out of curiosity, especially his hands. So Eileen started knitting gloves for him, filling up drawers with gloves of all colors and patterns. The changes the boy was going through did not go unnoticed by his father. During his brief time at home, Peter did nothing but mutter. "So he can walk, what's the big fuss? He can't do anything else, that's for sure. How is he going to work at the sawmill? How could I possibly teach him how to use the hammer or the chisel? He's nothing but a useless boy. He's not even answering when he's called. When will you stop believing he'll ever be a normal child?" he used to say before storming out the door. Poor Peter. If only he knew.